Welcome to the Bucher and Friends podcast. Here is your host.
Let's send it over to Rick Bucher.
Rick Bucher.
Welcome to another episode of Bucher and Friends, part of the United WeCast Network. I'm Rick Bucher. You can read my stuff on Bleacher Report, and you can find me at Rick Bucher on Twitter. That's RICBUCHER. You can also follow the show on Twitter and Instagram at Bucher Friends. And if you enjoy the show, please drop us a rating, review us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts, screenshot your review and tweet it to us at Bucher Friends, and you'll be entered for a chance to win some swag from Ryan Hollins, Will Blackman, or myself. All right, so there's a story behind the construct of this particular episode that I've decided to share with you. Now, some podcasters might not, and for all I know, you don't really care. But if you detect a wistful tone in my voice, I figure you should know why. It all has to do with this podcast's conversation with Nik Stauskas, the Portland Trailblazers backup wing. I wanted to interview him because I have a theory that he was contradicting, or at least the start of his NBA career was. This is the theory. A champion at any level will never play scared at any level. Now, he or she may not succeed as they move up the ladder and play against stiffer competition, but they're not going to shrink in the moment or from a challenge. There's something discovered in winning it all, particularly if you're the best player or one of the best players on the team that gets it done. You've stared down the eye of the tiger or faced the dragon, whatever analogy you want to use, and you figured it out. You stood at the precipice and you've taken the leap and you've survived. Not only survived, but thrived. Stauskas is of Lithuanian descent, but grew up in Canada, and he won a championship in Canada in high school, and he was the MVP of his team. He didn't win a championship when he went on to Michigan, but he did get to the championship game, and I don't recall him ever playing scared. So my theory was intact right up until he started his NBA career. Taken 8th by the Sacramento Kings, and I really hadn't paid a whole lot of attention to him prior to this, but I saw a guy who looked hesitant and frankly scared at times. Not surprisingly, the Kings dealt him to the very much tanking Philadelphia 76ers a year into his career. He was better in Philly, but still nothing that was really going to change your mind, and still seemed to court low on confidence. Then again, when your team is designed to lose, that can get to you. After a brief stop in Brooklyn, after a couple years in Philly, he showed up in Portland this season, and suddenly there was a guy dropping 24 on LeBron and the Lakers in the season opener. I'm like, wait, maybe my theory still has life. More than anything, I just had to find out what happened, what changed. And that's how I came to setting up a podcast with Nicholas Tomas Stauskas. Now, for the wistful part, the wistful come clean part, Nick was amazing in our conversation. He talked honestly about the struggles in Sacramento, about how he passed up a shot at one point, and Patrick Beverley barked loud and long the rest of the game about how Nick was scared and how it got completely into Nick's head. And I don't know that it ever quite got out. He talked about being traded to the Sixers and thinking, okay, this is, it's a fresh start. And then he looked at their roster and recognized maybe 3 names, and how he knew right then it was going to be a long season. Now, there's a couple other things he talked about. We talked about the fact that we did this podcast. He had just won a shooting contest against CJ McCollum and Seth Curry, Steph's younger brother. 2 very accomplished shooters. And watching that go down only fortified my belief there's something different about this guy now than the guy that I first saw in Sacramento and then in Philadelphia. Now, I'm not going to go on any more about stories that he told, because halfway through our conversation, I looked down at my expensive, newfangled dual microphone recorder, and the screen was blank. It had turned off at some point. I went it on, hit the record button, saw that it was recording, and quite honestly, the conversation was so captivating, I didn't want to distract by looking down at the microphone or at the recorder. So when I did, and I saw the blank screen, I mean, we had been talking for a good 15 minutes. And gut-wrenching doesn't begin to describe how I felt in that moment. I don't know if you've ever had anything happen in your life where suddenly the bottom fell out. You thought you had something and then you didn't. But that's how I felt. So we finished the interview using my iPhone. And I did my best to forget what had just happened. And then I went back and I checked the recorder, and it had basically taken the first 90 seconds and then shut off. Now, Nick was incredibly gracious about the screw up and just as forthcoming as we went MacGyver and used the iPhone. And I hope at some point to have him on again and fill in the blanks, along with a few questions I didn't get to ask, like what happened with the three-point contest he was supposed to have with Steph Curry when he was at Michigan that never happened. I mean, NCAA rules got in the way, but I'm just curious whether that was ever resurrected, or now having Seth as a teammate, whether that conversation or that subject has ever come up. Didn't get to that, but still got to a number of things, including the Canadian national team that looks like it could be pretty formidable. We talked about that. We did talk about what got him through as he was going through, particularly after Brooklyn. And he was very honest about, he thought his career might be over. He thought he might be headed overseas, and what it was like and where he was when free agency opened. And lo and behold, he had not one, but at least two teams that were interested in signing him. And just what a great situation he is in being in Portland, which I agree. I love stories like this. I love his story. I hope that you will enjoy it as well. So without further ado, here is Nik Stauskas. I'm now joined by Blazers guard Nik Stauskas, and I've been looking forward to this conversation. First of all, it's Nicholas Tomas Stauskas.
Yes, that's correct.
And one of the things that I always do in the podcast is sort of a warm-up. The middle name, who's it from? Why Tomas?
So it's Tomas because I'm Lithuanian, so it's more of like a European spelling. But funny enough, my brother I have an older brother. He wanted to name me Thomas because of Thomas the Tank Engine. And
that's Peter?
Yeah, that's my older brother, Peter. So he put in the recommendation. My parents were like, we'll give it to him as the middle name. So he didn't get to name me Thomas, but it's still stuck with me.
So you're named after
Thomas the Tank Engine, yeah.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. And the other name that you're known for, Sauce
Castillo. Sauce Castillo. That's what the fans seem to like to call me.
And so where does Sauce Castillo reside these days?
Well, I guess Sauce, I guess he comes out during the games, but it was just kind of weird how that whole thing started. It was a closed captioning era my rookie year in Sacramento, and ever since that closed caption era, people have just seemed to stick with it, and they seem to like it. So right. I was kind of like, whatever. If they like it, I like it.
All right. So being in Portland, just watching you win a shooting contest with CJ McCollum and Seth Curry, two accomplished shooters in their own right, and you're surrounded by great shooters. What does that do for you, especially when I think of the rosters that you were on in Philly and Sacramento? Probably not the same caliber.
Well, I mean, definitely not the same caliber, but when you talk specifically about Dame and CJ, they just put so much pressure on the defense because they can literally shoot from anywhere on the floor in any situation, whether it's off the dribble, coming off a pin down, ball screens, one-on-one ISOs, mid-range, deep threes. Like when you have guys on the floor that can they're effective from anywhere, it just forces the defense to play up more and gives us a little more space to play with. So for me, anytime I'm on the floor with Dame and CJ, another thing that I try to do is I try to set screens for them off the ball. Just because I know defenses are so concerned about where they are that a lot of times I get slips or, teams start cheating over a little bit. And for me, it's great because teams aren't paying as much attention to me as they are for them. So those are just little things I try to do when I'm on the floor with them to get open looks.
Well, but that's the greatest trick in the world. Yeah. Set the screen because ultimately it probably means the ball's coming back to you for a look.
Exactly. And a lot of time too, if you set good enough screen, you get them a look as well. Yeah. And, if they get any kind of daylight, they're knocking that down. So it's been good.
Canadian national team. First of all, I always think of you and I think of Andrew Bogut, just because Croatian, grew up in Australia, plays for Australian national team, comes to the NBA. You similar Lithuanian background, but Canadian, grew up in Canada. And so, first of all, I just wonder, what do you associate yourself most with?
Well, I guess Canadian. I lived in Canada until I was 15, but it's crazy now because I've lived in the U.S. now for 10 years. So I feel like almost a little American, but then, all my grandparents are from Lithuania as well. So I guess I have a little bit of everything, but I claim Canada.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at the Canadian national team. I'm looking at the Canadian program. Yeah. You guys are coming. Somebody put out the roster the other day. I mean, there is some talent there.
I mean, if we're able to compete in the Olympics in 2020, there's a solid chance that some NBA players are going to get cut from the team. It's looking that it's going to shape up that way. So that would be pretty cool just to see the evolution of Canada basketball and realize that we have more talent than we even know what to do with. Yeah. So I guess it's a good problem to have.
And you grew up as a Raptors fan, grew up as a fan of Vince Carter. Yeah. I wonder how conscious you were of Lithuanian basketball and a particular Lithuanian who played here in Portland who was pretty damn good.
I actually remember I was in 4th grade and my whole Lithuanian club team, we went to go see the Blazers play in the Air Canada Center because Arvydas Sabonis was playing, and I think that was his one of his last seasons in the NBA, so that was his last trip to Toronto. We all went to the game, and it's crazy to see now that his son's playing and developing into a great player. But for me, my favorite all-time Lithuanian player was Šarūnas Jasikevičius. That guy for me was my idol growing up. Well, I just remember watching him in the Olympics and he torched. Yes. He was torching in 2004, the USA, torching Argentina. He was killing everyone. And it was just the way he did it with the threes, dribble drives, everything. I was like, I want to play like that one day. That Very was cool. Someone I looked up to.
When did you start to look at basketball as a business?
Probably not till I got to the NBA. And one of my assistant coaches told me something. His name Laval Jordan, who coaches at Butler now. He was telling me when I was at Michigan, he was like, "This is the last time you're ever going to play for a team again." And I was like, "What do you mean?" He was like, "This is the last time you're ever going to play for a real team."
Wow.
And it wasn't, and not to say that these aren't aren't great teams in the NBA, but sure. It does change a lot when you add the business part of things, when you can get traded and salaries and contracts and all that different kind of stuff. It adds a different dynamic where it's not just basketball anymore. It's it's people's lives and their careers. So it does change things a little bit.
So you've gone through this evolution of coming in with Sacramento, and I see you now. Describe to me the difference between the Nik Stauskas that was drafted number 8 by Sacramento and the guy that I'm watching with the Blazers right now.
I've definitely over the last couple of years, I've tried to learn as much as I can. I've watched a lot of film and, I've continued to work on my game. But I think the biggest difference is, I've allowed myself to kind of relax a little bit and just try to enjoy the game a little bit more, because I've learned over the last 4 years that I'm at my best and I can really only impact the game when I'm having fun and I'm enjoying myself. When I'm too tense and I'm too worried about this and that, that's not when I'm me. Mm-hmm. And that's when I'm that's kind of what happened to me in Sac and Philly and whatnot. So for me now, I'm just trying to enjoy the game. I'm enjoying winning. I'm enjoying playing for a great organization. And I think because of that, I've had a little bit more success than I've had the last couple of years.
How have your aspirations shifted as a result of all that you've gone through? Like, what's your ambition and what do you set as your goals?
Well, I think, for me, that I still have so much I want to accomplish, and I still feel like I can get a lot better. I feel like for me, this is like really the first couple of weeks of my career that and it's crazy to think that, but first couple of weeks of my career where I've actually felt comfortable out there and felt like, this is where I belong. I should be playing against these guys. I'm just as good, if not better than them. And, I think now it's just room to keep building on top of that. The same way that I built off my poor performance over the last 4 years. Now I just got to build on a little bit of success, and hopefully I can just take that to a different level.
What did that first game mean to you here? Because everybody's still talking about it.
Man, it was a lot of fun, and for me, LeBron was my favorite player growing up too. So it's probably just extra a little bit special that we got to open the season against him on national televised game, TNT. And just that first half to see the ball go in, first 2-3 times, you just get in that rhythm, and then you just forget about everything. That's that kind of that feeling I have out there where there's no thinking, there's just doing.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I tried to explain before. I'm trying to get to that point now where I'm like that every time I'm on the floor. There's no thinking about, should I shoot this? Should I cut here? It's just you go out there and you strictly play off instincts and how you feel. And when I do that, when I trust my instincts, I tend to play at my best.
When was the last time you had that feeling, the feeling that you had in that first game prior?
Probably wasn't since my college days at Michigan, to be honest. And I've had, great shooting nights in the NBA over the last couple of years. Like I've had nights where, I've made 6-7 threes, but it just that feeling of joy and hunger, and like the feeling of like, man, these people can't stop me. Like, having that feeling, it's been like 4 or 5 years since my Michigan days. So, it was definitely fun. That sense of joy of playing basketball was back. And I was like, hey, I could get used to this, man. This is fun.
Who kept you going in the in-between time? I mean, we're talking about 3-4 years where it wasn't that. Who did you lean on? Who was important to you in that space?
Definitely my parents have been there, through everything. My mom has spent, many nights talking me through a lot of different situations. My close friends. And then, just last year I met my fiance, and, she played a big part because last year was pretty much the worst it got, for me. That was kind of low point.
Really?
Yeah, I got hurt in Philly to begin the year, and I fell out the rotation where I just wasn't playing anymore. Then I got traded to Brooklyn, and when I got traded to Brooklyn, I had a couple of good games early on, but Brooklyn was also dealing with some injuries. And when the lineup, came back to everyone, returned from their injuries, again, I fell right out the rotation and just wasn't. And we came back from All-Star break, and they just told me, unless someone did get hurt, I wasn't going to play, moving forward. And especially heading into, that was my contract year, heading into the free agency in the summer. It was a low point for me because it got to the point where I started questioning. I was like, well, maybe, I don't belong here in this league. And that was a tough thing to battle, because, here I was trying to claw myself back to, playing well, getting the rotation. But at the same time, I felt like I just had this cloud over my head of just negative thoughts about my future. Or, maybe I should just go overseas. Maybe this isn't for me. And my fiance was definitely big throughout that year, just being like, no, you got this. Like, you're going to get back on track. Don't worry about it. You're going to figure it out. And, I'm really, really thankful that I came here to Portland, just because like I do have that sense of joy again. And I feel like I'm kind of back on the right track. And it's crazy to think because just 6 months ago, I was, thinking maybe this is it for me. Maybe I shouldn't pursue this career. Yeah. So it's crazy how fast things can change. And sometimes it just takes like sticking through it with, through some really hard times to finally see some daylight.
Did you know going in, and we'll end here because that's a great place to wrap up. Did you know going into free agency that you were on the Blazers' radar, that you got that call 10 minutes into free agency?
I had no idea whatsoever that I was going to get a call from Portland. I had no idea that anyone was going to contact me the first day of free agency. Like I was in Avalon, New Jersey on July 1st, and I had actually just gone out with like some friends. And I just got back to my house. I was literally brushing my teeth. It was like 12:10 a.m. getting ready to go to bed. And then all of a sudden, my agent was calling me. And when he started calling me, I was like, okay, something's going on.
Yeah.
But then even after Portland called me, the Lakers called me like 5 minutes after that. So I was sitting there like, and at that point I was still in a bad place mentally where I was like, maybe I won't get signed this summer. Like I was honestly thinking, maybe I won't get signed this summer. So in the first couple minutes of free agency for both those teams to call me, I was like, okay, maybe I might get something going here. But I'm really glad I decided to come here to Portland. I feel like it's a great fit.
Well, as I said, wanted to talk to you because watched your evolution. When I saw you play in a Blazers uniform, I was like, wow, okay, that's the guy. And my theory still works in terms of if you've demonstrated that you have that certain ability, it's in there. Yeah. It's a matter of, as you probably know, in the NBA, it's so much about fit. It's about being in the right place at the right time. Yeah. And so really, really appreciative of you taking the time and really happy for you and look forward to seeing things really take off for you with Portland.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thanks for having me on. And it's always a pleasure talking.
You got it. All right. Hope you enjoyed that conversation with Nik. And before we sign off, there are 3 subjects that I need to address. I will get into them even further tomorrow when Ryan Hollins joins me on the program. But we do have to discuss very quickly Jimmy Butler and the deal that sent him to Philadelphia for Dario Saric and Robert Covington and Carmelo Anthony, apparently having played his last for the Houston Rockets, now being available on the open market. And of course, the kerfuffle between Draymond Green and Kevin Durant and what it means for the Golden State Warriors. Very quickly on the Jimmy Butler situation, it was a move that Philadelphia had to make. What it ultimately does to Markelle Fultz, whether it moves the needle, whether it makes them a true contender against Toronto and Boston, I'm not convinced of that. I'm not convinced that the chemistry between Butler and Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid is going to be any better. I don't know that it solves their problems. Ultimately, depth was their problem. Does give them more of a go-to guy, but I don't know that Jimmy is a first line. If you're talking about going to a championship, if he's the kind of go-to guy that gets you there. I don't put him in the class of Kyrie Irving or Steph Curry or Kevin Durant at all when it comes to that. Now, I still think that Philadelphia had to make this move because it's worth the risk. Even if he ultimately doesn't sign long-term there. I mean, let's face it. Robert Covington was a find. Dario Saric, they weren't going to be able to keep. So they get a free look at a guy, and who knows? And from what I've been told, it's not a done deal that he stays long-term with the Sixers. He was, aside from the fact that he wasn't, that they weren't on his original wish list, you're also talking about a Sixers ownership that's very pragmatic. Jimmy Butler has a lot of tread on those tires. I would be very cautious about signing him to a max deal, a long-term max deal, without any sort of injury provisions. Now, he doesn't have the same history that Joel Embiid does, but I would not be surprised if the Sixers attempt to craft a contract with him that gives him a little bit of flexibility and an out. And it only remains to be seen whether Jimmy is open to taking a contract like that. Now, the other part is the suitors out there. I know there's a lot of people who think that the league is in love with Jimmy Butler, that he's a top 10 player. Vast majority of teams that I talk to in the league don't see him that way, especially after all the chemistry issues in not one but 2 different places now. It's a little bit like Kyle Lowry staying in Toronto. Lowry was very interested in finding another home. Ultimately, he couldn't find one that was going to pay him what Toronto was. And Toronto couldn't find a replacement for him. So it was the best situation for both of them. That's how it could end up in Philadelphia. But just telling you as of right now, it's not a done deal from either side, from what I've been told. Now, Carmelo Anthony, apparently, quite clearly, done deal when it comes to playing with Houston. He's out. And I got to say, for a really smart guy and GM, Daryl Morey, they did not handle this well at all. A bit of a PR nightmare in how they handled it. First, he was sick, and I use air quotes in saying that. And then it was, we haven't made a decision on his future. And meanwhile, all the reports are coming out that his teammates and everybody else are not expecting him to play and that he's played his last. Now, they have beaten both the Pacers and the Nuggets since they said goodbye to Carmelo. And I do believe it's an addition by subtraction. I also understand why players around the league are upset at the premise that Carmelo Anthony was the problems with the Rockets and that he's a bit of a scapegoat here. Well, he was one of the problems. Let's be honest. Like, you can have respect for Carmelo and what he's been and still recognize that he was a bad fit in Houston and was part of the reason why their defense had fallen off so dramatically. It wasn't the only reason, for sure. Players have a point in that. But the reality is that what Carmelo is attempting to do is one of the most difficult things ever when it comes to playing basketball. Having been a volume shooter your entire career and then becoming an efficient, economical, complementary shooter. Because let's face it, the one thing that he brings you, he's still a scorer. I should say scorer rather than shooter. He's a scorer. And now he's got to do it efficiently for the first time in his career. This is also why it's dangerous to get excited about a guy who averages 20 plus on a bad team and start singing the song of, well, if only he had some help, if only he had better teammates around him. If that team ain't winning, the fact of the matter is, if you're the go-to guy, when the offense caters to you, your scoring should be a given. You should be averaging 20 plus. Everything's run to you. There aren't bad shots for you. You have all the time in the world that if you're off, you know you're going to continue to get shots and opportunities. So it's a question, when you look at a player on a bad team who's scoring a lot, the question is, what are those points producing? Are they producing wins? When is he getting those points? And does it create opportunities for his teammates? If the answer is, I don't think so, then he's not getting the job done. He's getting his, and that's about it. Now, if Melo wants to continue his career, he is going to have to choose. He's either going to have to get a lot stronger or he's going to have to get faster and lighter, depending on which direction he wants to go. Probably a little bit of both would be ideal. And then he needs to pick the brains of guys like Jason Kidd and Grant Hill and find out how they made the adjustment, going from superstar, main cog, to complementary, effective complementary player. Carmelo is still plenty good enough to play in this league, but he needs to adapt. He needs to come home, as they like to say, and realize that he's not the player that he once was and that he's not going to have the role that he once had. But being in the NBA, playing this game, getting paid for it, it's a pretty good life. I would milk every day, month, year, game that I could get out of that. But maybe that's not where he is. Finally, the Draymond KD kerfuffle, resulting in Draymond's one-game suspension after end of the game. KD wanted the ball. Draymond didn't see him. Went sprawling, lost the ball. They ended up losing the game in overtime to the Clippers. And apparently the discussion, the dispute that started on the court in the huddle after that play continued into the locker room. Now, to pretend this is no big deal and happens on every team, as I've seen plenty of people, including some players on other teams, try to suggest, is just foolish and myopic, and quite frankly, it's wishful thinking. The Warriors' chemistry has been one of their foundational pillars, and this does not speak to good chemistry. I think about all the times that Steph and Clay, and they'd missed each other, or something happened. You never had this. You have volatile personalities with a lot on the line. Keep in mind that last part. There is natural tension, too, when you've been with each other as long as, or as much as these guys have been. They're together more than any other, year after year, multiple years now. You're around each other a lot. That's just, you get tired of each other. It happens. That's a natural byproduct. Draymond, physically, still doesn't look completely right to me. And KD is finding out that even after 2 championships, there are people that don't want to give him credit for being a true champion. That's going to wear on you too. And I honestly believe there's a good reason why KD signed a short-term deal. And it's because he wants to keep his options open. Doesn't mean that he's necessarily leaving, but I think he wants to be able to explore and see where things are at the end of the year. Now, I don't know the context in which Draymond brought up KD's pending free agency. Sometimes, you know how it is. When we get heated, we throw out stuff that's just meant as a shot at the other person. It's whatever available. And then sometimes it's because it's a resentment that we've been harboring and finally comes to light. This one is kind of complicated because if KD leaves, it would presumably improve the chances of Draymond getting a deal, and a good deal, with the Warriors. I can't imagine that the Warriors would want to see both of them go. So the idea that somehow Draymond would be upset that KD hasn't committed long-term to the Warriors, I need to know the context in which that conversation came up before I can say this is ultimately what it means, if it means anything. All right, that's my address of those three subjects for now. We will get into them more deeply when Ryan Hollins, former NBA center, joins me in our next podcast. We'll get into, is there a place for Carmelo Anthony? And what does all this mean for the Warriors with Boogie Cousins waiting in the wings as well and Steph being injured? And exactly where does Ryan see the Philadelphia 76ers going with Jimmy Butler? All right, that's it for this podcast. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Rick Bucher, the show on Twitter and Instagram at Bucher Friends. And please drop us a rating. Review us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Screenshot the review and tweet it to us at Bucher Friends, and we'll send you something for free if you're the winner in our drawing. It's going to be something good, I promise. In the meantime, thanks for listening. Talk to you tomorrow.